Great. All right. Well, welcome everyone. I am Charlotte Willner. I'm Executive Director here at the Trust and Safety Professional Association, or TSPA. For those of you who aren't familiar with our work, TSPA is a nonprofit, and we support the global community of people working in online trust and safety. We work alongside trust and safety teams to help them develop the expertise and the skills and the relationships they need to navigate this unique profession. And we're also committed to bringing more professionals into the field. And the event that you are dialed into today, or you're watching later, is our very first Careers AMA. We as professionals know there are a lot of folks who want to get into this field and do not know where to start, or they've maybe been trying to get into this field for a while and they're not landing that job. They don't get that interview, or they don't get that call back. And a number of us in the community were talking a little while ago about what are some ways we could be helping folks who are trying to get into the field really best target their applications, understand what the job actually is. That's another question a lot of people have, is like, okay, but like, what is this? And I was talking actually with one of our panelists today, Dona, a few months ago, and we were talking through, we thought, well, what about like an AMA? What if people could come and really ask the questions that they have about this career? So we are so pleased to finally be bringing you this AMA. Our participants today, if you're going to be taking these questions, are Dona Bellow and Christine Lehane. They're going to be giving you a little bit of their bio in a minute. But before they do, I want to give a little bit of a disclaimer. This is an AMA, which means ask me anything. But listen, folks, there's a couple things we're not going to ask today, and that is specific questions to Dona and Christine about their current employers. So please do not in the chat be like, Dona, I would love to work for your team specifically. How can you give me the nod to get into your interview process? That's not the type of question we're doing today. Dona and Christine are here as independent individual professionals, and they are really well equipped to be answering all of your questions today based on their own professional experiences. So with that, I will turn it over to Dona and Christine. Tell us a little bit about yourselves before we jump into these questions. Why are you here? What brought you here today?
I can start, and then I'll pass it over to you, Christine. So Dona Bellow, where do I start? I've been in trust and safety for about, I think, 8 years now, just like many of my peers. Didn't know what I was getting into, got into it, and just never left. I started my career at Google in an legal operations team. So looking at like government requests and like how do we process that, and sort of like an end-to-end team where we're doing like policy and tooling development, a lot of different things. So I get to learn a lot. And from there, I was able to branch out and explore other companies, different sizes, anything from like the large ones to like tiny startup, and also exploring like the broad range of like policy development, ops, product advisory, etc. So because of that, and also like through TSPA and advising TSPA for, I think, close to 2 years now, maybe it's more than that, what is time? I've also got to meet a lot of people and chat regularly with people who want to learn more about the profession and the industry and working at tech companies, etc. And so I'm here because I'm trying to help answer some of these questions at scale, because that's how we do things in this industry. So all right, Christine.
Thanks, Dona. I started my career in academia. I did a PhD and postdoc in psychology, and I was studying transformative life experiences. When I was interested in moving into tech, I wanted something that I could carry over the theory that I had been using, a lot of the experience that I had gained in academia, moving into tech and trying to understand user experiences as a user experience researcher. And when I started my career at Meta on the integrity team in London, and wanted to basically have something that would have a lot of impact on a global scale. I started my career working on things like account security, identity verification, and then over time moved more into the content space and worked on content problems and content moderation. And I'm currently a research manager supporting a team of researchers working on integrity problems across Meta's family of apps.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much for being here today. It's my job. I love this job. It's my job to ferry in all of these questions that we have already gotten through the Eventbrite. And I will be starting with those, but certainly audience, you are here live. You can use the Q&A function to ask questions as they arise, and we'll be able to just work through them. We've got an hour and we're going to get to your questions. So the first and most common question we get is, how do I get started in trust and safety? And I think that's such a difficult question. I mean, it's a very natural question for people to start with, right? Because if you don't know what you don't know, but it's also like one of the broadest and most unanswerable incarnations of this question. And so perhaps a way I would rephrase that is, how do I know if trust and safety is right for me? Like what sorts of like skill sets or sort of personal inclinations do you think make for a successful trust and safety professional? And how can people kind of go about sussing that out in themselves?
Yeah, I somehow I feel like you made the question bigger than the initial question was.
Whoops.
But yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing that is important is also understanding like what trust and safety is and means at this point in time. I think, at least from my perspective, that's evolved over time. I think you would have asked me like several years ago, I would have said, rules, content moderation. And now it's sort of like this huge umbrella of different functions across like policy, product, legal. I mean, so many different functions involved. And so many like subject matters involved. So you have like very sort of like deep expertise around things such as like fraud, minor safety, etc. And you also have sort of like the broader knowledge of like, how do we think about like the interaction of all these things? And so I think getting the idea of like the umbrella of things that could fall under trust and safety is a good place to start, and like educating yourself or talking to people about that to better understand what we're talking about. And then thinking about sort of like this intersection of like what you're very interested in, your skills, and whatever transferable experience you have. I think no one here, as far as I know, had a degree in trust and safety. And so that's not really a thing. So that means that people were coming from a lot of different and very varied backgrounds. And I think to a certain extent, like that's also by design, because we need a lot of different perspectives and opinions and, skills fitting into this type of work. And so that means like you have some transferable experience from somewhere that you can probably apply to this. You just have to find like where and how. And so I think things are important to think about from like a skills perspective are things such as like project management. Almost everything is a project, whether it is writing a policy or conducting some research or, I don't know, threat analysis, providing a report, I don't know, but almost everything is a project. And also we only have like so much time and always more work to do that we can manage. And so being able to knowing how to prioritize and managing projects like from end to end is something that's very important. And I think the other thing I'll mention, and Christine and Charlotte, like there are like a million skills we could mention, right? Like that's the beauty of it. Like so many things that you can bring to the table. But I think another important thing that for me as well is just cross-functional collaboration and being able to work well with other people. And especially when those people are coming at the problem from very, very different point of view, you have to have sort of like this mindset of having humility of being like, okay, I might be absolutely wrong here, and therefore I'm going to be open to listening to what the other person has to say. Or I might also be right, but I may not be seeing the full picture of what the problem in front of me. And so I think like being able to be open to what other people have to say and work with them, incorporate their perspectives, all of that is super important to do this work. I will shut up now.
I want to say +1 to everything that you've said. It is so true. Especially the part of being comfortable with not knowing the answers or realizing that you don't know what you don't know. That's like super critical when entering the trust and safety field. I think on a very practical level, the advice that I would give is to review the community guidelines of the, like, whatever companies, whatever platforms you're interested in joining, and get a real sense of what is it that they're dealing with? What are the kinds of problems that you would be dealing with on a day-to-day basis? Do you feel excited about the idea of working on these topics, about like trying to reduce these topics, trying to protect people? Is that what like makes you excited in the morning, on a Sunday evening, makes you look forward to starting work on a Monday? Other things that I think I would do is, if you maybe with the TSPA or looking at LinkedIn, try to like map the careers of people you admire who are already in the field and think, whose career do I want? What pathway do I want to take? Is this person's profile how I envision my career going? And sort of using that as a way to map what you would like to do as well. In terms of skills, I feel like there are a few additional ones. Creativity, personally, especially in the research field, is something that I think is really crucial. And in the trust and safety industry, there are so many times in which you won't have access to the data that you need, you won't have access to the people that you really need to understand, you'll have time restraints, resource restraints, etc. So being creative and being able to think outside the box is going to be really helpful. It's also helpful from an adaptability viewpoint, because this is a field that is constantly changing. Adversarial actors are innovating, we need to innovate too. So being able to do that would be great. Comfort with ambiguity, I think, goes in the same line. As things change, you're not always going to know is this definitely the right direction, but where this field involves a lot of experimentation and trying to see, well, will this move us inches forward in protecting people? And finally, I would also say some degree of compassion. There is a tendency outside of the field to label everyone who violates policies, for example, as bad actors, but we know that that's not the case. There are lots of reasons why the way products are developed or the way policies are crafted, where people do what is considered bad things, but for good reasons. And especially when we're in the user experience realm, we need to have a good degree of compassion to understand what's driving these behaviors.
I think just on the compassion piece, I'll add like also compassion for yourself as you start and learning about these topics and try to understand, and even as you get started, because like I think resilience is another skill that's important in this work. Like we deal with heavy topics, heavy work, and you know, give yourself some grace, right? Like as you're exploring all of this and trying to understand how things work. Yeah.
Great. I've been sorting, we've already got all these questions coming in. I've been sorting them sort of by category. I'd say the biggest category we have right now, I'm labeling as multidisciplinary, which is there's a lot of you in the audience who are in a certain kind of job right now and want to be doing a trust and safety job. So just letting you know, in a few questions, we're going to do a multidisciplinary lightning round. We're going to go through like, I'm a former prosecutor, I'm in nonprofit, and we're just going to, we're going to give you some ideas. Before we get to that, I want to return to this question of education. So Dona, you'd said, you don't think anyone out here right now has a degree in trust and safety. I think that's an incredibly safe bet, because right now there is no degree in trust and safety. There are some institutions developing courses, curriculums, certifications. I would be very surprised if there wasn't a degree program in trust and safety that's developed, in a variety of places in the next 10 years. But also, Godspeed to the person making that curriculum, because it changes all the time, right? So one of the challenges that a lot of folks have currently in the field, and certainly coming into the field, is there's so many other professions where it's like, well, you go to school for this, you get your certification, or you get your degree, you get your license, and then you practice, right? Our field is still new enough that we don't have that infrastructure. And so the skills that you really need to develop are, by and large, things you have to cobble together in a really multidisciplinary way. And a lot of it is stuff you learn on the job, which is great if you're already, in trust and safety, but is hard as an answer if it's like you want to be in this job and you don't have it yet. I get some job experience. So the question I'm leading up to is, what do we think as a group here are some of the concrete sort of skills or pieces of knowledge that people can work on or should be thinking to develop in trying to qualify for a trust and safety job? So the example I often give is statistics, which is like, come on, but especially if you are, in undergrad right now watching this, that's a skill that actually not a lot of people end up with in their adult life, but is transformative in the way that you can actually understand like the data that is in front of you. So having a really strong grasp of like probability and what that actually means, and then having the ability to explain that to other people on your team, that's actually a real asset when it comes to like large scale decisions that we end up having to make in the field. Dona and Christine, what are some other examples of, maybe types of courses or types of, sort of practical applications people could be exploring that will really benefit their practice in trust and safety?
I think what comes to mind for me is also sort of like expertise based, right? Like there is no trust and safety certification, but there are certainly certifications if you're specifically looking at like privacy or cybersecurity, for example. And so I think exploring like which pieces of the work from an expertise point of view, like subject matter point of view, you want to focus on might help you outline like very specific qualifications that you need to get out there and get to be able to gain the knowledge that you want to have. I think another thing is also there's a lot of knowledge that can be acquired by sort of like I think as Christine was mentioning earlier, like the companies themselves put so much content out there, and there is so much that you can actually learn from the blogs, from the actual website, like the articles that they put out, like events that they put on where they talk about some of the issues that are facing. And I mean, mostly sort of like more research oriented events where you can learn about these topics. And so I think like the ability to also like, just be out there and researching like where the information is to find it is important. And I guess in that same vein, and Christine can touch more on that, like research skills will always be helpful in this field. Why? Because a lot of times, like you're going to have to deal with an issue that either your company has never faced or you've never faced, no one in the industry has ever faced, and you have to go and find out the information. And so there's no expectation that you may have the answer, but there will be an expectation that somehow we figure something out. And so I think being able to take the initiative and go research information and know how to complete research. And I guess that's why we have a lot of people who've studied like sociology, anthropology, and all that, because these people are good at research. and they're the ones like who help sort of like find information and put it together in like a coherent way. And then I guess I'm gonna make a plug for, the legal folks out there, because having studied law myself, I think the analytical skills that you get and sort of like the logical processing, and law is not the only field that you can use to do that, is very helpful, because a lot of times you have to like being able to zoom into a lot of details and extract those to build up the bigger picture, and also like understand like how the bigger picture may impact like very specific situations. And so the analytical skills around that are super important. At least I feel like my legal education helped me have that. Yeah.
I'm just actually, before you jump in, I'm going to +1 this comment you had around like, so you see a lot of people in like anthropology, sociology coming into trust and safety. I was an English major in undergrad, and that's the highest level of education I ever achieved. And there's a joke, of course, about like, oh, English major, what are you going to do with that? Oh, it's really employable, right? But I tell people actually, like, my degree helped me a ton when it came to trust and safety. And it's not because I needed to know Chaucer to do my job. It's because so much of what an English degree gives you practice in is, here's like too much reading you have to do. Pick the reading you're going to do, and then you need to go to class and be real confident about your choices and like have a discussion and make arguments. And that's honestly so parallel to so much of what we have to do as professionals, because there's so much information out there. There's actually too much information out there. And a huge part of your job is figuring out and having the sensibility to like, okay, what of this do I need to know for the decision I'm making today? And practicing that over and over. Nobody goes into an English degree thinking like, I know this is going to make me really good at like setting the rules for discourse online. But in fact, like a lot of those, if if you think about the way you're developing skills in your job today with the degree you have or the degree you're working to get, there are a lot of transferable practices that you can really, spin very well into a job in trust and safety. And interview tip, the more you're able to sort of think about that and tell that story about yourself, the better you do in interviews. When someone's like, what do you mean you have a degree in like health science? And you're like, and here's how it's going to help me. Any degree like really does have a trust and safety application. All right, Christine, I'm sorry, I jumped in there.
I totally agree with that. I definitely feel like anyone working in this industry could do with more skills on how to diffuse and pick out the crucial information from just the like ocean of stuff that's out there. And I totally agree that I feel like any education has something where you can pitch it in a way that it demonstrates how you can have impact in this field. Some of the obvious ones for me would be, again, coming from user experience lens, understanding human-computer interaction, understanding how different design patterns are related to how people behave on platforms, looking at things that are what are good design promoting pro-social behavior, what is poor design or even deceptive design, what are design patterns that can push people towards behaviors that would actually be per policy violating. So really getting a good understanding of that. And the human-computer interaction field has really boomed. So I feel like there are no shortage of courses in that area. Again, understanding theories of human behavior. So why do people break rules? What are the circumstances in which we can set up interventions to encourage people to comply with rules? How do we encourage people to have compassion for others online? All these types of theories of human behavior, I think, are really useful as well. A lot of those come from psychology. A lot of them come from criminology too, especially if you're interested in the adversarial space. Learning how integrity or trust and safety systems work is also really important. I think there are lots of white papers that other companies have put out. Their academics are constantly innovating in the field as well, and they have a lot of publications that you can read. And I think another aspect which can't be forgotten is that for many trust and safety roles, if you're talking about a product role, say you're talking about engineering, data science, user research, some role like that, a designer, you also have to pass product understanding and the same sort of loop that other people would go through. So not to focus exclusively on the trust and safety side, but make sure you develop that product sense as well.
Sorry, if I may jump in one more time just to add something, because it's a question that I get a lot. And
that's not a sorry, that's literally why you're here. So please do.
I wanted to stress that you do not need to know how to code to get into trust and safety, unless
yes, let's talk about this.
Typically want to come into an engineering role, but you don't need to know how to code. I know a lot of job postings out there also have SQL as a skill to have, and it's yeah, I mean, if you're going to do analytics and threat detection and things like that, it's going to be super helpful, and probably you need that indeed. But I think for a lot of other jobs, this is just a nice to have. It's going to help if you can do that. If you search databases, it's amazing. But I just want to stress that those two specifically are not hard requirements to get into TNS. The only thing that you have to be able to do and be open to is to learn about technical concepts, right? And how they can impact the issues that you're worried about. And it was a hard learning curve for me, I'm not gonna lie. So you might come from a place where you have a lot to learn, but definitely it's feasible. And once again, you don't need to know how to code.
Let's actually dwell on this for a second. Let's do a little job description myth busting here, because I think a lot of folks look at these listings and are like, well, I don't have 4 years of experience, or I don't know SQL, or whatever it is. Let's read between the lines a little on okay, what can you actually glean from these listings when they're written in this way? So SQL, let's talk about SQL for a second. I totally agree with you, Dona, that in a lot of jobs, unless you are applying for a technical role, in many cases, technical skills are not required. I will say, often I do recommend if people have time to burn, which some people do, if you are feeling like you are, sort of technically minded or you're technically interested, SQL can be a really good thing to have. It's a strong nice to have. Often when you see that in a job listing, sometimes people just like copy and paste it from other companies' job listings. So like they may not even know why they're asking for SQL. Sometimes it can be a signal that like maybe the tools you're going to be working with aren't like the most built out. This was an experience I had. I went from a bigger company to a smaller company, and at my bigger company, I had like 2 data analysts working on my team, and it was great because they just did all this. And when I went to the smaller company, I was like, okay, so we're going to need to know this thing and that thing and how many used. And they were like, cool, so you're going to find that out, right? I was like, me. And in order to do that, I needed to learn SQL. And so if you see that, it's often not like, even if they say it's required, it's not necessarily required if it's non-technical, but do be aware that like it may be telling you something about the tooling environment and how sort of advanced or sophisticated that is. You may still need to learn that. Let's talk about experience. We do have a question here about like, okay, how do I get into this field if all the job postings require 2 to 4 years of experience? All right, yeah, it's a little Sphinx question there. Here we go. Here's the riddle. How do we do that? I've got some thoughts on that phenomenon in job listings, but do either of you have a perspective on how that's written?
Sure, I would love to hear your thoughts, Charlotte. But my thoughts are that like you need to think about experience very like expensively, right? Like and we talked a little bit earlier about like transferable skills and transferable experience. And so how can you shape the things that you've done before to resonate with the job description, right? And really that's valid for trust and safety, but it's really valid for any job search that you're getting into, right? There's a set of responsibilities that you're going to have in this job. And there's probably things that you've done in the past, even if you've done internships or like school projects that you've done, where some of it is going to be applicable and that's going to count towards the experience that you need, that is fulfilling like the amount of time. And then I think the other thing is that like, and maybe like this is like a bit of an insider informative, but a lot of companies like operate on like sort of like a hiring scale. And so they're trying to hire, they have a level in mind that they want to bring you at, but they could definitely bring you like 1 level under, 1 level above. And so like the requirement in terms of number of years tries to cover some of that. And so it's not like, oh, if you don't have the 5 years, like it's not going to work. No, you may have 3 years, but because like you've demonstrated like all the things that you've done or some specific expertise that you have, they're going to be able to bring you in at sort of like the target level, or maybe 1 level under because they want to align with everybody else in the company. Or you can also have like just the 3 years, but you're demonstrating like so much expertise and so much knowledge and so much like ability to do the job that is just going to bring you in at like the 5-year level. So I hope that makes sense. Like it's like, end of the day, don't get discouraged by the job descriptions because they are often copied and pasted. They're written in very broad terms. And they're really trying to like catch actually a wide pool of people. And then it's like the sorting through of like who may be able to best fit the job. So, yeah.
I completely agree. Managers commonly will do interviews with people that would have varying levels of experience. Like there could be years between the different candidates. And really you'll make a decision more on who has the skills that you need and who is the best fit for the role, as opposed to this person has 4 years, but this person has 5 years experience.
Yeah, I think that's so right. And, I certainly, for many years as a hiring manager myself, was writing those types of job descriptions where I'd like to think of like, did I ever require something and be like, nah, actually, it doesn't matter. I don't know. I do not recall at this time, but it is very common for folks to say, okay, like we need 2 years of experience. And what I think often hiring managers are communicating that is, obviously as Dona was saying, they're sort of proxying for an internal level. And so once you get into, the salary conversations and all of that, that starts to matter. But they're also, I think sometimes they're trying to weed out other types of candidates. So I know when I first started posting recs, like job requisitions in safety, for entry-level jobs in particular, you just say, okay, no prior experience required. Great. And you'd get like half applicants who are like, they understand what this job is, they're excited about it, they're informed. And you'd get half like, I work on an oil rig in safety. And it's like, ooh, no, that's not what I meant when I said, so often, especially if you're putting these on like LinkedIn or some of these bigger like job aggregators where people are filtering by like how many years of experience or whatever, it ends up being very like mechanistic. You write the rec in a particular way to make sure that like the poor oil rig guy isn't like, why didn't I never hear back from Pinterest.com? Right. It's trying to like make it more efficient for everyone. The thing I would say is, yeah, I know, I'm still thinking about that oil rig guy. Like, I bet he's super safe. And like in a lot of ways, maybe he would have been a good addition to the team. The best hiring managers, in my opinion, are really, as Christine said, looking for a skill set. And we do have a question here about like, how do you get in front of the people that like you want to talk to in order to pitch how you're going to have that impact? So much of how you get there is being prepared to talk about your experience in a way that directly relates to the job you're applying for. That can look like rewriting your resume sometimes when it's like, like tailoring a resume. That often really looks like sitting down and looking at your life experience and figuring out what about what I've done, as Dona was saying earlier, is it a school project? Is it a particular educational experience or work experience? Often it's like extracurricular, it's volunteer, like something I love to see on resumes is people who have like done dispute resolution. Like if they are, like a youth soccer referee or football referee for our global fan base here at TSPA. Like that's a great dispute adjudication role. And like, that does not mean like, oh, I am a trust and safety professional, like clearly like pick my resume up. I would want to talk to that person because that is a real tough job. And that kind of, volunteer job, or maybe it's paid, gives you a lot of the skills you would probably also need in a lot of these trust and safety jobs, explaining the rules, when people get up in your face about it, being able to keep a cool head, like all those sorts of things. So really examine your own experiences and be creative about how you sort of see those parallels and have that opportunity then to explain it to your recruiter, to your hiring manager. I'm a big believer in cover letters too. This is more controversial. Some people are like no cover letter people. I think the cover letter is a great opportunity for you to really tell your story in an authentic way. I cannot guarantee people will look at it. Some managers are like, nope, death to cover letters, but that's my 2 cents. Anything to add on this, or shall we move to perhaps our multidisciplinary lightning round?
I would just add one thing. In that I think it's really important to learn the lingo, to be able to go into those interviews and you already speak the same language as the people who are interviewing you or the hiring manager. And ways that you could do that is things like joining local meetups that are like connected to tech or people in the trust and safety industry, network, do your readings, volunteer maybe in a local startup or something like that, to really understand how you can apply the knowledge and experience that you have in the language that tech people are used to hearing.
Yeah, that's super right. And a lot of that comes from just immersion and reading, right? Like these local, like join TSPA and come to the networking events. I mean, there's always that, but so much of it is reading, right? Dona, I think, was saying earlier, like there's a lot you can find on the company blog. There is actually, there's a lot you can find in, now we have like pretty much trust and safety press, right? Like Casey Newton writes Platformer, and that's like not exclusively trust and safety, but it's pretty heavily trust and safety. Like there's a lot more ways now to be kind of immersed in the discourse of trust and safety without actually having to have that job yet yourself. And that kind of just ambient prep really does pay off when you get to the interview stage, because you are genuinely knowledgeable. It's not like you crammed before this test and 48 hours of reading Platformer has got, no, you genuinely have some expertise, and that is really noticeable in the interview process. Before we actually move to lightning round here, we do have one person saying, hiring processes are oftentimes black boxes. How important is it to network and possibly receive a referral compared to applying from the company's career website? And let's actually talk about the referral and application process, because answers may vary. I'll give a quick starter answer on that, and then would love to turn it over to our other panelists as well. This varies a lot by company. Some of the larger companies have caps on how many times you can apply through the website, have like, if you apply 3 times, you can't apply again for another 3 months. It's very sort of like cog in the machine, and there's like clear operational reasons for why that has to be the case. So in those sorts of circumstances, sometimes a referral really does help. It's not a guarantee. Smaller companies, they really read every like application they get through the website, and they don't have like a big algorithm sorting everybody out who came from Yale or something. Like, it's just one person back there. Sometimes it's not even a recruiter, it's a hiring manager, because there's not enough recruiters, because PS, there's a recruiter shortage, who are like really looking through each of those. So don't assume just because you're coming in through the website that you're not going to have success with that as an avenue. But that said, like, how panelists, how do you feel about sort of the power of a referral? What are the strengths and what are the limitations?
Yeah, I think just really plus what you said about like, it's really, there's not a one size fits all. It's really going to depend on the company, its size, like who's referring, even maybe sometimes, right? Like, but I will say that, like, I mean, one thing that the referral is going to do is, at least in most cases, like get your resume in front of the recruiter, which I guess that's one hurdle that you're passing through already. Like, you're not getting, auto rejected or anything. Like, someone will have eyes on your resume. And so I think that's a good thing. The other thing to keep in mind is that, like, it's still like a cross-functional process, right? And so like whoever is referring you, even the team that's hiring you, like the decision is not just theirs. In most cases, like there's a group of people who are going to interview and come together, and they may have differing opinion. And so in that sense, like the referral doesn't have like so much weight that is going to counter that. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. I think sort of like the other side of this question was also, how important is it to like network? And I mean, networking in of itself is not going to guarantee you a job, but it's going to do, I think, 2 things in my mind. The first one is, as Christine was saying, like start to get you in the rooms where people are talking about these things and learning how they talk about them, so that you can model that in your interview, right? Like, so the more you talk to people who do this work, the more you're going to hear what they're thinking about. Ask them about how, they're thinking of solving for something specific, right? And maybe you can use that, or like similar to that, like in your interview process. So you're building like the lingo and sort of like the space or the thinking that is going to be needed for your interview. So that helps. And then the second thing is that if you happen to talk to someone who is a hiring manager or will become one, and you somehow either built a great relationship or like had a really great conversation, like they will have you in mind, right? Like, it's now they've met you, they thought about you, they know what your skills are. And when the right job comes, like you may be the person that they reach out to, or someone they know who is hiring, maybe coming to them and asking, hey, do you know folks who blah, blah, blah. And I can say, oh yeah, I just talked to Linda over here, and she'll be a great person, to consider. So I think this, to me, is like the bigger value of like the networking and the way to think about like referral. Like, you're staying on people's mind, I think, is very important.
One more. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Christine.
Oh, just going to say that I agree with everything that was said. In my personal perspective, worst case scenario with a referral is that it is treated the same as a regular application. So in my mind, if you're asking for a referral from someone who can speak to your experience and passion, then it feels like only an potentially added benefit for applying.
I was just gonna add to both of you that the thing that I counsel the most in, so TSPA, we run like a career office hours program, and calling it a program is honestly like a little inflated, because it's mostly just like me with a Calendly sitting down and talking to members about like, hey, yeah, looking for a job. But the thing I counsel the most is patience, which is an infuriating answer to get when you're like thick in the job search and you've been doing this for 2 years, and like, but everybody I end up talking to, if they stick with it, does eventually get a job in trust and safety. And so much of it really is because they're putting in the time to build that network. And that is a hard job. It is a job that requires a lot of, or can really require a lot of time, a lot of investment, a lot of waiting. It really often does pay off because it's the relationships of trust, right? And one of the challenges I think we have as a field is that we have a practice that is predicated on trust between practitioners, trust between, us and the people we are helping, our users every day. And that can easily veer into a clique or, sort of like a closed environment. And that is like the opposite of what we actually need to be fostering when it comes to bringing people into trust and safety. But it is also like, well, yeah, it's sort of, it's not just who you know, right? It's who you trust. And so the more relationship building you are able to do with people who have this job, right? The more they're going to remember, oh yeah, so-and-so has this background and they're looking for a job and like maybe this, right? There's a lot of back channeling. Well, people will say like, hey, have you ever met such and such? They applied for this job. And people can say, yeah, they're super cool. Oh, I'm so glad you're interviewing them. Like there is we're still small enough as a field that there is a lot of that sort of network effect, and it does matter. So, and that's part of why TSPA exists, is to help make those connections. I do want to actually I want to move to our lightning round now. So we have by far and away the most popular type of question we have is, I do this kind of job right now and I want to do trust and safety. What do you recommend for me? So I've put a lot of those together and I just want to do some quick brainstorming with this group on okay, someone with this background, what are some kinds of roles you think they should be checking out or they should be, sort of thinking about in their search. So first person is like, hey, I am in nonprofit today and I would like to move into trust and safety. What would we recommend as some potential departments, teams, avenues for someone in nonprofit today? I will volunteer one, which is a burgeoning sort of department in trust and safety. It has a bunch of different names, but it's basically like partnership management. So I now know about this because I work at a nonprofit, even though I used to work, in industry. And there are teams, especially at some of the sort of mid-sized to larger platforms, who their whole job is figuring out who do their trust and safety teams partner with on the NGO side, and how do you identify those organizations and make things work. If you're a nonprofit today, you're probably familiar with these types of folks in tech, but a lot of them really are starting to roost in trust and safety specifically. And so a real natural parallel might be some of those partner manager roles or partnership management roles.
Yeah, I think the other thing I would think about would be what work does your nonprofit do? What does the nonprofit specialize in? Because if you work at a nonprofit that specializes in women's safety and domestic violence, right? That sort of creates, I wouldn't say natural, but an easy path into subject matter expertise in that area, being able to come and be the SME in a policy development team, for example, to be consulted on those projects. And I think the other side of that is if you are also part of a nonprofit that does a lot of activism and communicates a lot with different parties in their space. Roles such as policy communications might be something to consider, because you also already have some of those conversation and know how to convey the message and all of that. And also some roles that are tangential to trust and safety, more in the public policy space, because it also involves a lot of industry engagement, governmental, civil society, and being able to have those conversations with all these different parties is also important. So yeah.
To add some more onto that, I think the parallel fields to trust and safety within the tech industry are things like social impact, responsible innovation, well-being, and a lot of these are directly applicable for people who are coming from nonprofits. Another thing to consider is if the nonprofit industry that you're in is not directly applicable to any of these types of organizations, what you could do is start with a more generic tech role within, whether it's a product role or a policy role or a legal role, where the company that you join has a trust and safety organization within it, where you could partner with them over time and perhaps transfer over time if there is internal mobility opportunities.
Great answers. All right, lightning round. Next one. We have a few folks who are in like child abuse prevention or child abuse investigation. It looks like we've got someone from sort of the nonprofit side, potentially. We've got someone from sort of the law enforcement or legal side. What would we recommend for someone with more of that background?
Well, thankfully, there's a whole space dedicated to child safety.
Like, good news and bad news. Yeah.
Yeah, I said thankfully, it's pretty bad. Anyway, yeah, there is sort of like this natural space that you could very easily like come into because it exists, it's established, and there's like a whole ecosystem around it. And so I think from my perspective, like then it becomes like functionally and skill-wise, like what do you want to be able to do? So if you have like an investigative background, then maybe like joining some of these like legal investigations or like, you know, threat detection or like deep analysis types teams, it would be super helpful. Or, you know, like the partnerships piece is also important if you are, you know, in a position where like you get to talk to a lot of nonprofits and a lot of other folks who are like partnering together in the space. But yeah, I think I would look at like the specific skill set that you want to like specialize in and functionally like where you want to be, because in this space, again, like we have the whole stack is there in terms of trust and safety work, like from policy development to like the external facing stuff to like tooling and, you know, building products for that, for reviewers, etc. So there's a wide space of opportunity based on like the skills that you want to further.
Right. Child safety was sort of my my core specialty when I was in industry. And I remember the first time we got a job application from someone who'd worked for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And it was like, this is the holy grail, because we up to that point had been working exclusively on sort of the tech side, where our only experience with that work as, you know, frontliners was just like the work itself. We felt like, you know, we have some practical sort of experience day to day, but we don't have any of the deeper theory. We don't have, you know, maybe some of the background knowledge that would be really helpful in, you know, like processing these reports and deciding how do we design these flows. And so having folks come in with a direct child safety background was is just incredible. And I'm seeing actually a number, hey everybody, I'm seeing a bunch of people chime in to be like, yeah, I do this other thing in nonprofit. I do like, so we've got someone here who's like, yeah, I work at a nonprofit working with hate crimes. I'm like, yes, like having that external expertise come into these more subject matter oriented teams, it's a game changer for so many of these teams. And so, you know, certainly if you have prior experience in these areas and you want to continue working in these areas, there is ample room in the field for your expertise, and you should really you should be enthusiastic and confident applying for those jobs, because people are really often quite excited to be getting those sorts of applications. Maybe the oil rig guy also wants those jobs, but unfortunately you are more qualified, and so you will probably get the nod. One thing I will, oh yes, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add one thing. Oh, were you going to jump to the next question, or did you have something to add?
No, go for it.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to say that like, there's also like, if you're interested, especially like in the product aspect and the product roles, like I think let's not forget that like, because of a lot of external forces and also society's demand, we have to think more and more about embedding, you know, those concepts of like safety by design, for example, into the way we build user-facing features and product. And so those product teams as well also are in need of like the expertise around like minor protection, how minors think about their own, you know, experience online and all of that. And so whether it's product advisory, product policy, or actually that building the tools and features that are going to make the product safer. Like that's also another space to consider when you have like the deep expertise on that.
Absolutely. Let's see. Okay. Next group, and I just want to flag, we've got 8 minutes left. We're not going to get to all the questions, which we kind of predicted even with the hour. So just so for questioners, we have these in the chat log, and we're going to do our best to answer these after the fact. So don't worry if your question doesn't get answered live. We're gonna incorporate a lot of these into our FAQ page. Plug for the FAQ page, tspa.org/careers. Dona and Christine worked a lot on this page, actually, as it happens. And this is where we're going to be capturing a lot of this information as well, if it's not already there. All right, we're going to talk about 2 more areas of folks coming in for lightning round, and then we'll sort of start to close things out. Some folks have like a business background. They have like a business, marketing, finance, accounts management, things like that. And they're interested in doing trust and safety. What would we recommend for them? I mean, first of all, please come in and do our budget. It sounds great. Like, please. It sounds like you're great with Excel. I'm joking, but actually it sounds like you might be great with Excel, which really can be a winning feature for a lot of teams, especially if they're having to do some more, technical or technical adjacent work. What would we recommend, team?
So I can jump in here and say that if you have a business and marketing background, there are roles that work within trust and safety that are looking for your exact education. So there are roles that are like product marketing manager, business program managers. There would be a lot of work in terms of dealing with trust and safety budgets and sorting out resources that would be in the wider program management realm as well. Depending on your proximity to product and how much you want to influence product, a lot of product managers have business backgrounds too. If you're more exclusively marketing, there are also research roles where a lot of the work in the trust and safety landscape is about doing competitive analysis and understanding what are the innovations that are happening in the field and how can you apply those to the platform or company that you are working for. So I think that there are a variety of roles, and if you use those keywords in your search for careers, I think you would find several where in the job description, those would be the types of skills that people would look for.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna make another plug for like the policy cons folks. If you have some kind of like marketing background, and it's not that we want to be out there like marketing trust and safety, but I do think that like there's an opportunity for all of us in the industry to do a better job at telling the stories of the work we do and why we do it. And like, I think those teams are built for that as well to a certain extent. And so if you have sort of like this narrative focused experience and can bring some of that to a role like that to help the team communicate externally what they're doing, why it matters and how it impacts the company and people, I think it's a really nice thing to be able to think about.
Yeah. All right, last lightning round. We have folks coming in from academia. Now, I do want to plug, we have an entire session about academia to trust and safety coming in November. If you go to tspa.org/events, you will be able to see details on that. But I also know that one of our panelists maybe has some of this experience. So tips for folks coming in from academia to trust and safety, what types of roles should they be targeting?
I can start. It depends on what discipline within academia you're coming from. Social science is a great background for moving into trust and safety. It's similar background to myself, similar background to most of the researchers that I support. When I say social science, I'm thinking of backgrounds like sociology, psychology, anthropology, political science, human-computer interaction is sort of like the in-between. These are great backgrounds. When thinking about moving into trust and safety, depending on what role you're applying for, I think Dona can speak to the policy side, but on the research side, really make sure you know your research methods. If you're hired as a researcher, it's because the unique thing that the company needs about you is a high quality research skill. So first and foremost, for any of those research roles in the company, make sure your research methods, you know them really, really well. The other aspect is leaning in on your understanding of human behavior, leaning in on your understanding of how people use products, and make sure that you can bring that human understanding to this product development. As Dona was speaking about earlier, it's not only that companies have to think about this in terms of how they're designing platforms, but there's also a lot of regulation that is going to make companies think about this too. So all of your social science background, and we'll link to more of this in the FAQ part as well, is really valuable, more so than most people realize for this field.
Yeah, I think Christine is definitely more an expert than I am, but I think the only thing I'll add is that if you're coming from like academia and sometimes government as well, like there can be, at least from a lot of folks that I've talked to, there can be like a steeper learning curve to just entering the tech space, because it is a very special space, I guess, in many ways, or at least very different, right? Like the pace of things, etc. So I think in addition to, you know, the expertise and the skills that you're bringing and all of that, I think also educating yourself about, you know, the tech environment, the competitors, the companies, how they work, how they move, like all of that, just like getting the broader picture of like the actual industry you're getting into, I think helps a lot with sort of like your first exposure, and being able to tie, you know, the more theoretical concept that you have to like concrete, not solutions, because no one is going to expect you to bring solutions into an interview, but like concrete like paths of action, I will say, right? When you're talking about these issues, because I think sometimes that's what's missing. So like, how do we attach the theory to the practical things that the companies need? And so understanding like the general environment, how they think about their issues, and then being able to tie the theory to the technical and the practical problems that we need to solve is something that's also very important, something to, you know, probably like sharpen your skills around. Yeah.
One final thing I would add, which is a common thing I see with people moving from academia into industry, is publications alone are not necessarily considered impact when you're applying for roles within industry. It's what change did you drive from the work that you did? So what did those publications lead to? Did it lead to changes in the national guidelines for something? Did it lead to some sort of, it could even be a smaller like internal program within the university where you worked, but really focus on what resulted because of your work over and above just like things like publications and reports.
Yeah. All right. Well, I cannot believe it, but it's been an hour and it is time for us to go. So I think this was a success, given that we've still got like 30 outstanding questions. So thank you, first of all, to the audience today for submitting all of these questions. This is real proof of concept. We were like, we think people will come to an AMA. You sure will. So thank you for being here. I think we're going to need to do another one of these. We talked about making these quarterly, and I think the answer is yes. So please do stay tuned. We will have another one of these. Oh gosh, if it's October, are we talking January? We got to figure that part out, but tspa.org/events, you'll be able to see when that comes up. We are going to put this on YouTube. We're going to be going through all of the questions and seeing what we can incorporate into the FAQs. I did drop 2 links into the chat, and I'm going to repeat these out loud for folks who are watching later. One of them, of course, is tspa.org/careers. That's where you can find this FAQ that Christine and Dona and a number of our other community members worked on. It's great. We're really excited about it. We're going to be adding to it. We also, there were a few questions about like, are there particular like job titles or like keywords I can be using to search for jobs? If you go to our curriculum, we do have a page for that. And if you go to tspa.org, you go up to the top under, let's see, explore. Yeah. Down at the bottom of that drop down, it says TNS curriculum, and there is a page called key functions and roles. It's a long URL. I said I'd read it, but like, I'll put it in the description of the YouTube video. How about that? With that, thank you so much for joining us. We can't wait to see you in the field. Big thank you to our panelists today, Christine Lehane and Dona Bellow, and we'll see you all next time. Hang in there and stay safe.
Thanks everyone for coming.